Version 2.6 of Honkai Star Rail is coming up really soon, and after the crazy characters we got in 2.5, we're getting a bit of a break by only getting one new limited 5-star character in Rappa. Running alongside Rappa is going to be Imbibitor Lunae, who once stood at the top of all DPS characters. So today we are going to go over both of their kits and pull value to see whether or not you should pull for them on your account. Let's start out with Rappa. She's an imaginary erudition character that focuses on dealing break damage to multiple enemies. Her basic attack is pretty straightforward, as it just attacks a single enemy. Rappa's skill is also pretty straightforward for an erudition character, since it's an AoE attack. Now you might be thinking that Rappa's kit is kinda bland since there aren't any extra mechanics attached to her basic attack or her skill, but her ultimate definitely changes that. Upon casting Rappa's ultimate, she enters the seal form state, which increases her break efficiency, enhances her basic attack, allows Rappa to reduce toughness regardless of the enemy's weaknesses, and gives her 3 stacks of Chroma Ink. Also, using her ultimate gives her an extra turn, which works exactly like Seela's extra turns that she gets from her Resurgence proccing. And this is not considered as action advancement, so it is a bit of a different way the mechanic works there. And once Rappa uses all of her Chroma Ink, then she will exit the seal form state, and during the state, she can only use the enhanced basic attack, she can't use her skill. Now let's talk about Rappa's enhanced basic attack. So it's going to consume 1 stack of Chroma Ink, and it's going to deal a 3-stage attack. The first 2 stages of the attack are blast attacks, and between the 2 attacks you can choose which main target you want to hit, which is very nice, so you could try to spread out damage wherever you want to, try to deal more damage to specific enemies. But then the final stage of the attack is an AoE, so you'll be able to deal AoE damage to the whole field. Lastly, for Rappa's kit, we have her technique, which is going to put her into the graffiti state, and she's going to be able to just like move around on a skateboard kind of thing. Upon attacking an enemy to start the battle in the graffiti state, Rappa will reduce the toughness of all enemies regardless of their weakness types, which is really nice because Rappa is a break DPS, so you do want to have things that'll be able to reduce the enemy toughness as quickly as possible. Now, before we get into her pull value and what I think of that, you might be wondering, but wait, you didn't talk about Rappa's talent at all, and you are absolutely right about that. All the info I talk about in these videos comes from the livestream, and the 2.6 livestream didn't give us any info about her talent. So because of that, I'm not going to be covering it at this point. But if I had to, guess or talk about what I think it might do based on her kit, I could definitely see it having some kind of mechanic to give her some extra break damage, since she is a break DPS. And outside of the seal form state, I feel like her kit just needs a little bit more to really make it stand out. So I think having a way for her to give extra damage will be definitely good for her breaks, but we'll see once we get the actual kit reveal on probably this coming Wednesday if they keep the same schedule. So now let's talk about Rappa's pull value. Even with some parts of her kit missing from the livestream, Rappa seems to be a very strong break DPS option, which can give players another good break DPS when it comes to running a break comp. But if you've already pulled either Boot Hill or Firefly, then I feel like there's not as much of a reason for you to pull for Rappa unless you really like her, or if you want to use her for pure fiction, because with her being an erudition character, that's definitely going to be a good spot for her, because every erudition character does good in pure fiction. So there are 2 main reasons why I say that outside of like really liking Rappa or using her for pure fiction, that there's not really as much of a reason to pull for her. So the first of those reasons is that while Rappa seems to be good overall, she's not doing anything that's super game breaking or super busted to where other break DPSs that you have wouldn't be able to compete with her. She's probably going to be on a very similar level to like a character like Boot Hill. And because of that, if you already have Boot Hill and or Firefly, there isn't as much of a reason to bring along Rappa, since you already have that break DPS spot covered. And the second reason for this is you also, with the way the break team is working, the roster for break teams right now, and for the best break teams and the ones that everyone talks about, is still pretty limited, considering that for buffers, we pretty much always use Ron May and Harmony MC, and then for sustained, now we have 2 options. We have Gallagher, and then we have the limited option of Lingsha. So because of that, and just not having as many characters to make the team perform as well as everyone's going to have it in their mind that the break team performs, you will probably not be able to run 2 different break teams in endgame and have them perform at that same kind of level. Now, this can definitely change as we get more characters that can fill into this break archetype, but for right now, because of how small the team is, I feel like there's not as much value right now in having 2 dedicated break DPSs that you're going to use, because you're pretty much going to end up benching one of them. Now, I know I talked a lot about if you have Boot Hill or Firefly, but if you don't have either one of them, and considering that Harmony MC is free and Gallagher has been free in the past in a previous event, plus he's been on a couple banners since he came out, I don't think Rappa would be that bad of an option to pick up if you really do want to build that team. But at the same time, I feel like for break DPSs, if you go for whichever one you like for the most of the ones we have so far, that's honestly more than fine for me. Like, if they don't just pull Rappa just because you need to break DPS, or you want to break DPS. If you like Boot Hill or Firefly more, I'd probably just say wait for the rerun unless your account is super struggling and you're not progressing anywhere. And that being said, I still wouldn't rate Rappa's pull value super highly, not just because of everything I've said, but also because the second half banners for version 2.6 are pretty crazy. But I'm going to talk more about that once we go over the overall first half pull value at the end of the video. Next up, let's talk about Imbibitor Lunae, who is an imaginary destruction character. His gameplay revolves around using his skill multiple times per turn to enhance his basic attack up to 3 times. Upon enhancing his basic attack to one of the 2 strongest versions, Imbibitor Lunae will get an extra 12% crit damage per hit, starting from the 4th hit of the attack, up to a max of 48 crit damage. Now, let's go over each of his basic attacks. His regular basic is a 2-hit attack that damages 1 enemy. Then his first enhanced basic with using 1 skill point is a 3-hit attack that deals significantly more damage to just a single enemy. Then his second enhanced basic, which uses 2 skill points, is a 5-hit attack that not only has a stronger damage multiplier on the single enemy, but now it is blast damage, so it does hit those adjacent enemies. And then lastly, his final enhanced basic, which is a 3 skill point cost, is a 7-hit blast attack that has an even higher damage multiplier. Next, let's talk about Imbibitor's ultimate, which is a 3-hit blast attack that gives him 2 stacks of Squama Sacrosancta, which can stack up to 3 times. And each Squama Sacrosancta you have can be used in place of a skill point when you're enhancing his basic attack. And this is really important for Imbibitor because since you want to use so many skill points in such a short burst, you really want to... You're really going to need to keep skill points around for him, so being able to use less skill points at certain points with his ultimate is definitely very helpful. Now for Imbibitor Lunae's talent, it gives him a 10% damage buff for each hit during a single attack up to 6 times. This buff does expire at the end of his turn, but because the goal with Imbibitor is to get his max enhanced basic attack as much as possible, you really shouldn't struggle too much with getting this going as long as you are keeping up with the skill points that he needs. Next, for Imbibitor's technique, it puts him into the leaping dragon state for 20 seconds. While the state is active, his attack makes him dash forward, which will not only attack enemies in front of him, but will also block any incoming attacks. Entering combat in the leaping dragon state will not only deal damage to all enemies, but it's also going to give him 1 stack of Squama Sacrosancta. Now, let's talk about his traces. His first Ascension trace gives him 15 energy at the start of battle, which is helpful to get his ultimate quickly to get the Squama Sacrosancta stacks. His second Ascension trace gives him a 35% crowd control resistance, which is just going to make him get debuffed less often, which is a nice, quality of life for that, especially if you get into a situation where your sustain either doesn't have a cleanse or, you're not in a situation where you want to get cleansed so quickly to keep those skill points around, since most cleanses do use skill points. Then his last Ascension trace gives him a 24% crit damage buff whenever attacking enemies that are weak to imaginary. This should happen pretty much all the time, since for DPS characters you do really only want to bring them against enemies that are weak to their element. so that you could try to get, the weakness break regardless of if it's a break team or not. So you shouldn't have too much trouble getting that active as well. Lastly, his stat traces give him 22.4% imaginary damage, 12% crit rate, and 10% HP, which are definitely going to help with his damage and give him a little bit of extra survivability as a destruction character. So now that we've gone over his kit, let's talk about Imbibitor Lunae's pull value. As good as he was when he first came out, it's undeniable that not only Imbibitor Lunae, but also pretty much every hypercarry DPS prior to version 2.0 are not as good as they used to be. So it can be hard to justify pulling for Imbibitor over other more recent DPS characters. But if you really like Imbibitor Lunae and you have the resources and pulls on your account to be able to invest a bit more heavily into him with getting like a signature light cone, maybe getting a couple Eidolons, then he becomes a bit more competitive. And I also can't deny the value in Imbibitor's E2. So if you are a player who has Imbibitor Lunae, you're at like E0 or S0 or E0 or S1, and you want to try to get to the E2 and you have the pulls to do so, I'm honestly not complaining. I don't think that's a bad idea, especially since that'll give him a bit more longevity, since he will be noticeably better with those Eidolons, especially that E2. But with what characters we have coming later on, both in this version and beyond, and also with the next planet coming and probably next stage of power creep, it is hard for me to justify players to pull for him if they're just going for a single copy E0 S0, when there's other characters in the game that are able to perform much better with similar levels of investment. Finally, let's answer the big question here. Should you pull for Rappa, Imbibitor Lunae, or should you skip? And I think my answer for this one is pretty simple. Outside of if you really like the characters a lot, or for Imbibitor Lunae if you want to further invest in him by getting up to his E2, I think that both these banners are skips for two really important reasons. The first one is that while both of them are DPS characters, and if you're struggling for DPS, they can seem like, good options, and I think Rappa is a good option. But we also have to remember that in the second half of this version, we do have Acheron coming back. And while we don't know exactly how high Rappa's damage is going to be yet, we do know that Acheron will easily outperform Imbibitor Lunae. And especially with how power creep has been for DPS characters, like we've seen for Imbibitor Lunae, obviously it'll hit Acheron at some point, like it hits every DPS character, but for the past like 6-ish months that Acheron has been out, Acheron has been performing extremely well still. And she's honestly only going to get better as we get more nihility debuffers that she can benefit from. And the second reason that I think that these two banners are skips is that we have two new support characters that have been confirmed for version 2.7 in Sunday and the new Ting Yun. And while we don't know their kits, I do want to remind you all about what happened in version 1.6 before we got to Penacony. We got Ruan Mei, who was not only broken on release, but she is still, to this day, the best Harmony support character. Now, Robin is kind of close to her now, and I would probably consider them to be on the same level. But the fact that Ruan Mei has stood the test of time that much, and is, not looking like she's being power crept at all, I think that if Hoyoverse wants to make a pattern out of releasing a busted support character right before we go to a new planet, I think that it's really smart to prepare yourself to pull at least one of these new characters upcoming, if not both, for Ting Yun and Sunday. But that is going to be it for me. Yeah, I think overall that these first half banners are probably a skip in most situations. But if you are going to be pulling, let me know in the comments who you're going to be pulling for, and I hope it goes well for you. But thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed and want to see more content from me, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But with that, I will see you all next time.